Ladies and gentlemen, today I do not speak as someone seeking sympathy. I speak as someone who has walked through fire not to burn, but to forge. There comes a time in every life when silence becomes too loud, when shadows feel too familiar, and when masks no longer fit. That's when you stop asking the world for permission to be seen. That's when you stand tall and say, "Now, I will show them who I am." They mistook my silence for weakness. They called my patience passivity. They labeled my uniqueness as a flaw, and while they pointed fingers, I was learning, I was watching, I was growing. You see, rejection is not always punishment. It can be preparation. Pressure is not always cruelty. It can be calling. For every closed door, I built a new room. For every laugh they shared behind my back, I smiled and focused on my path. And when the moment comes, when the lights are dim and the crowd uncertain, I will rise. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that the pain had a purpose, that the trials were tutors, that identity, once dismissed, is now undeniable. I will not conform just to be accepted. I will not shrink to fit into their expectations. I was not made to be digestible. I was made to be undeniable. I do not seek applause. I seek understanding. And if that never comes, I'll still be standing. Stronger, wiser, louder. So to those who doubted, ignored, or misunderstood, thank you. Because without your resistance, I may have never discovered the strength within. I was not lost. I was hidden. I was not broken. I was becoming. And now, I will show them who I am. In many educational, psychological, and spiritual contexts, the concept of a misunderstood identity emerges as a pivotal point in personal development. Human beings are social creatures, and from a young age, we are often shaped by the words, expectations, and perceptions of others. Whether through formal education or social interactions, our identities are filtered through lenses that may not always reflect who we truly are. For individuals who feel deeply misjudged or mislabeled, whether due to their silence, creativity, mental complexity, emotional sensitivity, or nonconformity, life can become a series of silent battles. This keynote explores the transformation that occurs when an individual stops seeking external validation and instead commits to revealing their authentic self, not to impress, but to affirm their identity. When a person is misunderstood for extended periods, it produces what psychologists refer to as identity dissonance, a disconnect between one's internal self and the labels imposed by others. This dissonance can manifest in anxiety, frustration, or withdrawal. However, what society may interpret as coldness or strangeness is often a sign of deep introspection and inner conflict. Educationally speaking, this stage is crucial. It mirrors what cognitive theorists describe as the cognitive disequilibrium phase, necessary imbalance that precedes real learning or transformation. Just as confusion in a classroom signals the onset of understanding, personal misunderstanding often signals the beginning of identity discovery. The person who is misunderstood is often the observer, the quiet analyst, or the silent strategist. They may not speak much, not because they have nothing to say, but because they are listening, absorbing, and deciphering the true nature of their environment. Their silence is not apathy, it is refinement. In many educational theories, this type of learner, intrinsically motivated, internally aware, often has the highest capacity for original thought and break through action once they reach clarity. However, the social cost of being misunderstood is heavy. Often, people mock what they don't understand. They reject what doesn't fit their mold. And so the misunderstood individual may be labeled as difficult, arrogant, delusional, or worse. These projections, over time, can lead to the suppression of one's potential in order to blend in or avoid conflict. In educational settings, this is akin to gifted students underperforming because they feel alienated or unchallenged. In spiritual terms, it is like dimming a god, given light to avoid the discomfort of others, but there comes a breaking point, or more precisely, a turning point. The individual who has endured misunderstanding begins to recognize that no external validation will ever be enough if the internal voice remains unheard. They shift from wanting to be accepted to choosing to be authentic. This is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of reclamation. It is the moment when the misunderstood decide to stop performing and start becoming. From an educational perspective, this stage aligns with constructivist learning theory, where knowledge, and in this case identity, is constructed from within. The learner is no longer dependent on teachers or peers to define who they are. Instead, they engage in self-directed discovery, guided by lived experience, moral introspection, and often, spiritual awakening. They begin to understand that their uniqueness is not a liability, but an asset. The phrase, "I will show them who I am," is not about vengeance. It is about visibility. It's about taking up space with integrity, stepping forward with clarity, and choosing to speak even when your voice trembles. It's about refusing to let the misunderstanding of others become the definition of yourself. Educationally, this is the highest form of learning, the alignment of knowledge, experience, and self-awareness into action. When someone reaches this level of identity clarity, their presence changes. They stop being reactive and become intentional. Their silence gains weight, their words become fewer but sharper, and their actions speak volumes. They stop asking for seats at tables and start building their own. In doing so, they often become leaders, not always in title, but in influence. The misunderstood identity, when owned and expressed, becomes a beacon for others who have been silenced. It challenges societal norms, forces institutions to reevaluate their assumptions, and pushes education, art, and spirituality into new territory. This is why stories of misunderstood figures who rise, whether in history, literature, or real life, resonate so deeply. They remind us that being different isn't a defect. It's a signal of deeper design. This keynote, therefore, is not just a commentary on personal growth. It is a call to action for every educator, mentor, and spiritual guide to look beyond the surface. Behind every odd behavior might be a visionary in the making. Behind every quiet student may be a thinker whose ideas will one day shape the world. And within every misunderstood soul lies the power to show the world, boldly, unmistakably, who they truly are. Transformation is rarely born in comfort. It emerges from tension, adversity, and confrontation with reality. From an educational standpoint, struggle is not an interruption of growth. It is often the catalyst for it. Individuals who are consistently challenged, pushed to their emotional or psychological limits, often undergo a deep internal shift that reshapes their world, behavior, and sense of purpose. This process of transformation is both educational and spiritual, serving as a framework for identity reconstruction. The person who once felt forgotten or underestimated doesn't simply recover, they evolve. In academic settings, educators often refer to the concept of productive struggle, a state where the learner is temporarily confused or challenged, but ultimately benefits from the process because it promotes critical thinking, problem solving, and independent learning. The same principle applies to life. Emotional, social, or spiritual struggle produces cognitive friction. It forces an individual to question not just what is happening, but why, and in doing so, they begin to extract meaning from pain. This reflection leads to insight, and insight leads to transformation. From a psychological lens, struggle activates what Carl Jung referred to as the shadow confrontation, the meeting of one's suppressed fears, wounds, and contradictions. Many individuals who have been misjudged or rejected find themselves at war internally, carrying shame or bitterness that masks their potential. But within that chaos lies a unique opportunity, the ability to restructure identity not from social conformity, but from personal truth. In a way, the pain becomes a teacher, and the individual becomes both the student and the curriculum. Spiritually, the concept of struggle leading to transformation is embedded across sacred texts and faith traditions. Trials are seen not as punishment, but as purification. In these moments of hardship, a higher purpose is often revealed. When someone feels abandoned or devalued by people, they are often positioned to encounter divine clarity. They begin to hear a voice louder than doubt, one that reminds them that their value was never determined by social metrics, but by divine design. As a result, the struggle becomes sacred. It is no longer just survival. It becomes preparation for purpose. In the framework of educational psychology, self-efficacy plays a key role in how a person responds to struggle. Those with high self-efficacy believe that their efforts can bring change, even if they don't yet see the results. When someone has been cast aside or consistently misinterpreted, their self-efficacy may waver. However, when they begin to experience small victories, whether emotional breakthroughs, creative expression, or spiritual awareness, they begin to rebuild belief in themselves. This belief becomes the engine of transformation. Resilience, another key educational trait, is often misunderstood. It is not just the ability to bounce back, but the capacity to integrate hardship into one's personal narrative without becoming consumed by it. Resilience is built through pain, reflection, and ultimately action. In transformative moments, the once dismissed individual stops asking why they were hurt and begins asking what the hurt is teaching them. This shift from victimhood to agency is central to all forms of lasting transformation. Another critical component in this journey is metacognition, thinking about one's thinking. When someone has been belittled or doubted, their inner dialogue often becomes distorted. They may internalize the voices of their critics and begin to second-guess their instincts. But through struggle, they begin to examine their thoughts, challenge internalized lies, and rewrite their mental scripts. This self-awareness creates space for growth and confidence. The mind, once clouded by confusion, becomes a place of intention and clarity. Transformation is rarely loud at first. It begins in silence, in the quiet resolve to keep going, to keep learning, to keep building. The individual doesn't immediately announce who they're becoming. They study themselves, observe the world, and refine their path. Over time, however, the transformation becomes visible, not necessarily in speech, but in demeanor. In the choices they make, the boundaries they enforce, the vision they pursue. They become unrecognizable not because they changed into someone else, but because they finally became themselves. In educational reform, transformation is often marked by innovation, breaking old models to establish something more effective and inclusive. Similarly, personal transformation breaks internal systems that no longer serve the truth. It sheds the performance, the people-pleasing, the fear of judgment. It replaces them with conviction, clarity, and purpose. The transformed individual no longer waits for an invitation. They create the space. They no longer ask for respect. They live in a way that demands it without a word. What started as struggle ends in strength. What began in rejection finishes in revelation. And what looked like defeat becomes the defining season of rebirth. The human desire for approval is deeply embedded in our psychology. From early childhood, we are conditioned to seek validation, first from parents and caregivers, then from teachers, peers, employers, and society at large. This feedback loop forms part of our emotional development, as it helps us feel safe, seen, and secure. However, problems arise when this need for validation becomes the foundation of one's self-worth. The transformation from seeking validation to finding inner affirmation is not only essential for emotional maturity, but also critical for personal empowerment and identity revelation. People who have lived under the weight of misunderstanding often carry invisible emotional burdens. They spend significant energy trying to reshape themselves to gain approval, from dressing a certain way, altering their language, adjusting their personalities, and sometimes even silencing their deepest passions or beliefs. They learn, consciously or unconsciously, that acceptance comes at the cost of authenticity. But this is a false bargain. The more someone molds themselves to fit others' expectations, the more distant they become from their true self. This detachment from self leads to a phenomenon known in psychology as imposter syndrome, where individuals doubt their own accomplishments and live in fear of being found out. Ironically, this syndrome often affects people with high potential who have spent too long trying to meet unrealistic or misaligned expectations. Their self-image is built not on truth but on performance. And eventually, the weight of pretending becomes unbearable. From an educational and spiritual perspective, this tension represents a threshold, the moment when an individual begins to question the sustainability of a life driven by external approval. This is where inner affirmation is born. It doesn't arise from praise or applause. It grows from clarity, the realization that one's value is intrinsic, not conditional. A person shifts from asking, "What do they think of me?" to "What do I believe about myself?" And that question begins a deep and necessary excavation of the soul. Inner affirmation is the result of internal alignment. It is the quiet but unshakable confidence that emerges when your actions, values, and beliefs are in harmony. It is not arrogance because it doesn't rely on comparison. It is not stubbornness because it is open to learning. It is the spiritual and emotional clarity that comes when you finally understand that being misunderstood doesn't make you wrong. It just means you've been seen through the wrong lens. One of the key factors in moving from external validation to inner affirmation is learning how to sit with silence. When no one is applauding, when no one is cheering, when no one is affirming, can you still move forward? Can you still show up fully? This is the test of conviction. This is where character is forged. In education, this mirrors the transition from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation, where a learner is no longer driven by grades or praise, but by curiosity, integrity, and purpose. Spiritually, this moment is often described as a divine pivot, a time when human approval fades so that divine identity can emerge. This shift also requires a redefinition of success. For the externally validated individual, success is often about visibility, being seen, known, recognized. But for the affirmed soul, success becomes about alignment, being true to the call within, even if no one else understands it. This is a radical shift in how one moves through the world. Decisions are no longer made to please others, but to honor truth. Risks are taken not for admiration, but for freedom. Boundaries are set not to exclude, but to preserve peace. In time, this inner affirmation creates a quiet power, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that commands respect. It is the power of someone who no longer fears misunderstanding because they are no longer trying to prove anything. They have nothing to defend and nothing to hide. They are not seeking permission to be themselves. They already are. And that kind of presence is both liberating and magnetic. This transformation is not easy. It often comes with loss of certain relationships, roles, or reputations. But it also comes with gain. You gain clarity, freedom, and self-respect. You gain the ability to move without fear and to speak without apology. You become anchored in something deeper than applause, a purpose that no one can give you and no one can take away. Pain is often viewed as an obstacle to growth, but in a deeper educational and spiritual sense, it is one of the most effective instructors life offers. While most people instinctively seek to avoid suffering, those who have walked through real hardship often look back and realize that pain was not a detour, it was the path. The lessons that shape character, sharpen discernment, and ignite purpose are rarely found in comfort. They are forged in fire. In this light, pain becomes not just an experience to survive, but a platform for transformation. In an academic setting, the concept of experiential learning is recognized as a powerful educational model. Students retain more knowledge and insight when they experience rather than merely observe or memorize. Likewise, in life, pain teaches in a way that no textbook or lecture can replicate. It slows you down. It strips away illusions, it confronts your assumptions, and if you let it, it prepares you for something far greater than what came before. Pain teaches endurance, empathy, perspective, and wisdom, qualities that are essential for anyone walking in purpose. One of the clearest signs that pain is preparing you is that it begins to shift your focus from yourself to something larger. At first, the struggle feels personal. You ask, why me? Or what did I do to deserve this? But over time, the questions evolve. You begin to ask, what am I learning? Or how can I use this? That shift in questioning signals the beginning of transformation. It is no longer about what was lost. It's about what is being built within you. That building process often starts in isolation, where you are forced to sit with your fears, confront your weaknesses, and wrestle with your beliefs. This is where purpose is born, not from polished plans or inspirational quotes, but from real, raw encounters with adversity. Purpose emerges when pain gains context, when what hurt you begins to shape what heals others. That is when suffering stops being meaningless and becomes deeply redemptive. In educational theory, this parallels transformative learning, a process by which a person critically examines their experiences, reinterprets their understanding, and redefines their identity as a result. The learner becomes more self-aware, resilient, and morally grounded. Emotionally and spiritually, this transformation also aligns with the process of spiritual refinement. Just as gold is purified by fire, human character is refined through affliction. In the refining process, impurities are brought to the surface, not to shame the material, but to cleanse it. Pain exposes what's fragile, what's false, and what's unfinished within us. And in that exposure lies opportunity, the chance to release what no longer serves, and embrace what has been buried beneath layers of survival and pretense. When a person who has suffered begins to heal, they don't just return to who they were before. They become more than they were. They carry wisdom that can't be taught, only lived. Their voice carries weight. Their presence carries stability. They've earned authority in places where others are still seeking clarity. And because they've known pain, they walk with compassion. They don't minimize the pain of others. They honor it because they understand it from the inside out. This kind of purpose cannot be manufactured. It must be lived. It must be fought for. It must be refined in seasons of silence, loss, and wrestling. But once discovered, it becomes a powerful compass. It redefines ambition. It repurposes pain. It allows the individual to stand in rooms where they were once dismissed, not with a need to be accepted, but with a mission to serve. They no longer strive for applause. They operate from assignment, and that is what makes them unstoppable. Because once a person realizes that nothing they went through was wasted, they no longer fear pain. They recognize it, they respect it, but they don't bow to it, they use it. They become fluent in its language and use it to write a narrative that is redemptive, not destructive. They turn mourning into mentorship. They turn rejection into resilience. They take what was meant to crush them and turn it into the cornerstone of a new identity. This is the essence of showing the world who you truly are, not by proving your worth, but by living in such a way that even the pain becomes evidence of your purpose.